Hello and welcome back to awtoolbox.com. I'm Glenn Keller, and in this video we are going to be talking about interacting with data now that we know a little bit about navigating through the Active Workspace interface and performing simple searches to locate that data. Now we need to kind of understand what we're looking at inside of the system. So again, this software is used primarily in the manufacturing space, so a lot of the data that's inside of the client is going to be relative to manufacturing of some sort, whether that's SLM, Service Lifecycle Management, PLM, Product Lifecycle Management. Maybe you're working with 100% bombs like EBOM, MBOM in the manufacturing space. Whatever be the case, you are investigating data, and most of the time you're going to be working with things like workflow approvals, investigating data, revising data, getting new stamps on that data, hooking up attachments, and what have you. So there's a couple of key concepts in Active Workspace and Teamcenter. So if you've been working in the rich client or previous clients in Teamcenter for a long time, you'll know that Active Workspace and Teamcenter has a concept of an item and an item revision. If you haven't been working in it, then this is a little bit newer for you. So items and item revisions. In Teamcenter terms, the item is really going to be your folder or categorization of your revisions for that object as it's worked over time. So this is really a common place where you can see all the iterations of your part or your document as you've revised and released it. Think of it as a way to basically have a unique identifier like your part ID or your product ID, and then all of the iterations hanging underneath of them represented as revisions. So in Active Workspace, we primarily work with the item revision. That's what we see in the display. And the item revision has your PDFs, has your parts, has your UG masters or your NX data. All of that represents what that is defined in an item revision. Now, as the item revision goes through workflow approvals, you get little flags on those item revisions that denote different things, like whether or not this is released for production or whether or not this object has been obsoleted, or if it's been disapproved, something along those lines. Item revisions in Active Workspace and Teamcenter can represent anything from changes to parts to documents. It is an abstract process on which we have an object and we have attached data to it. In Active Workspace, there are other components such as folders, which you see here, which are just a combination of things that you paste into them. And they're just kind of like shortcuts, if you will. They're just like if you're in your operating system and you want to paste something underneath the folder so that you have a copy of it in that spot. The only difference is that when I paste something in this folder, it is only creating a shortcut to the original, which lives in the database. So let's take a look at some of this data. So if I'm looking at a folder, you can see when I select the folder, depending on the layout I have, I can select the folder, expand properties on the right-hand side here in the overview, and I can see things like name, owning user, description. Depending on the object, you may have things like release status, and more attributes defining that. So you can see release status, the type of object it is, the date it was modified last, are all up here. I also have options to edit the object, and if I hit the ... I could check it out or basically lock it so other people can't work with it. Since this is a folder, it has a unique little page down here, a little section that contains the contents of this folder. So for instance, the home folder has a folder icon as well. It's a different type of folder, but if I select that, you'll see that the contents of this folder are the elements underneath that folder. If I do a search, So I'll come in here and I'll search for our 09 search, which will give me a lot of the components in my assembly. I'll close my filters for my search and move this over. I can see as I select each one of these are item revisions. I can scroll to the right in my table, and if I have them, I can see there's an ID that represents that revision, what revision it is, so in this case it's A, if it's in a workflow process, and other information about it. So in this case, the item revision, I can tell is an item revision up here in the type field. Could be a specific type of item revision that has different attributes on it. I can see things like its ID, name, release status, identifying information about the person who had created it, if it's in any folders or projects that apply additional security to it in my organization, if it has intellectual property assigned to it, so IP licensing, if there's any global alternates for purchasing. I can see if it's a part of a change, 3D data about it, depending on if my organization has stored or has 3D data about the elements, from which I can then take measurements or do some type of light work against this part. I can see where used information about it, and this takes us into a concept that all of our components are in one database, and they may have shortcuts or connections to other objects in the system. And if they do have connections to other objects in the system, the Where Used tab shows me where. So if it's used in any assemblies, if it is a top level object, if it has references, or if it's like copied underneath another object somehow. So this one says that this is used in this other object down here. And how this helps me is if it's used in other places, I can see what kind of an impact changing this would have. I can also see that if I wanted to delete this object or remove it out of the system, I would have to break any of these connections that it has to other things in order to do that. I can also see things like attachments. So attachments, if we look at that top-down view, we had an item revision, which is what we're looking at the moment. Then the files, the attachments, would be like the UG master and the direct model data sets that are underneath that item revision. Now, a lot of people that have worked with the clients in Teamcenter in the past know that the connection point here is called a relation. And in older clients, we used to call these pseudo folders. In Active Workspace, these are just represented by tables, files, documents, described by, etc. So it's the same thing. It's an attachment, it's something hanging underneath the item revision that helps describe that item revision. In this case, 3D data and CAD data. But these attachments allow you to add data to them by clicking add and uploading files or performing searches or going to your clipboard in the system to attach data that's been created or authored. And depending on your processes, you may be able to modify this as you're working through a workflow. You can see history information about the data as well. So if this is a revision, how many times has it been revised over time? What other revisions and what happened to those? You can see participants if it's going through an approval process in a workflow, who's all kind of a part of that approval process. And then you can see and generate reports against that data, such as things like BOM reports, sign-off history reports, requirements management reports, things like complying and defining trace links, and a lot of other information. So if I come in here and I generate, I won't have a ton of data relative to this just yet, but in this case it tries to download an XSLM file, a Word document, or in this case it would end up being an Excel document. However, if I try and do a report that's more an HTML output, and generate it, then it'll print out that report for me right here. And this is only one type of report. There are other types of reports like active reports that we can access to give us more information about the data used and the data inside of the system. So this has been a video on kind of investigating data as you take a look at it. We'll look at more types of data in future videos, and we'll go deeper into editing that data, making modifications as a part of a workflow process, or just starting fresh, creating a new piece of information.